Hi there, and welcome to the channel of A Disappointed Man with me, Jason Kennedy, the Disappointed Man, and I'm back out on my balcony once again here in rather grey Taiwan, and the subject of today's talk is Joseph Conrad's 1911 novel, Under Western Eyes. Rather topical right now, one might think. And I will begin with a very short summary of the story, and I can't really do that without also addressing the interesting structure of this narrative, which has formed one of its major attractions for critics. Okay, so in part one, we're introduced to the protagonist, or the central figure. I'm very reluctant to call him a hero of this novel, and that is Razumov, who's a student at the university, and he becomes embroiled in revolutionary politics when a fellow student and friend of his, Victor Haldin, commits an act of terrorism, and he engages in a kind of anarchist bomb throwing which kills a minister of state riding in his sledge. And in the aftermath of this event, he seeks sanctuary in the rooms of Razumov, who knows absolutely nothing of this plan to kill a minister of state. And Haldin calls upon Razumov to render him assistance and to help facilitate Haldin's escape from the city. And Razumov consents to this and travels through the snows to a drinking den where he locates a coachman who is supposed to bring his horses to a certain street at a certain point in the evening and meet Victor and spirit him away to safety. However, it's not to be, because when Razumov arrives, he finds the coachman in an advanced state of inebriation and clearly in no position to take part in any escape plans that night. And in a rage, Razumov thrashes the coachman and departs. And walking through the snow, he wrestles with his conscience over what he should do next. I won't say any more about that. Now in part two, what we learn is that the narrative in part one has come into the possession of an English professor of languages in Geneva. Now, how has this happened? Well, before he committed his attack, as part of his plans for the future, Victor Haldin has sent his sister, who's in her 20s, and his mother to Geneva for their safety, with the intention of meeting them there later himself. But it doesn't happen. And so in part two, we are getting information directly from the English professor's encounters in Geneva, and also we're receiving reports from the sister, because after they discover that Victor has died in this way, they begin to be courted by the coterie of revolutionists who have congregated in Geneva to hatch their infernal plans to destabilize Russia and trigger the revolution that they all dream about. So part two is about the deepening relationship between our English professor and Natalia, Victor's sister, and her deepening relationship with the revolutionists. And at the end of this part, Razumov himself arrives in Geneva, and we're not really sure to what purpose. Okay. Now in part three, we enter into Razumov's thoughts kind of directly again, and we follow him as he seeks to ingratiate himself and become a part of the revolutionists' plans. But we're also hearing in the internal dialogue he carries on with himself all his doubts, all his self-loathing, all his disgust at having to assume this fake identity, for the purposes of which we cannot really be sure at this point. We just do not know what his ultimate intentions are. Does he plan to serve the interests of revolution, or is there something else in the works? And this part culminates with a great dialogue between one of the revolutionists, a kind of veteran female, and Razumov, where there's this tension there, and you feel that Razumov wishes to unmask himself and confess that far from being a revolutionist, he is the great betrayer. Okay. And in part 4, we go right back to the wake of Victor's attack and Razumov's engagement with the authorities, and we begin to learn just what transpired and why he is in Geneva, at least partly why. And this sets us up for the explosive finale to what up to this point has been a very slow moving work. And just on that point, I want to note how artistically brave it is to concentrate all the action at the end in this way. And Under Western Eyes did recall for me, structurally, this effort by Henry James, his novella The Aspern Papers, where all of the real action is concentrated in the last 10 pages or so. It takes enormous artistic courage to produce a work which follows that design. And as you'll see in the next part, while I don't necessarily believe it's the greatest conclusion ever to a novel, it certainly does pack a punch and leaves the reader with an enormous amount to ponder. And now what I'd like to do is just pick out a couple of passages and read them to you, just to give you a taste of what is in store for you if you pick up this novel. This is from the walk in the snow after he's thrashed the drunken coachman, and Victor Haldane is still waiting, locked inside Razumov's rooms, and Razumov walks in the snow, wrestling with his conscience over the best course of action to take here. Razumov stamped his foot, and under the soft carpet of snow felt the hard ground of Russia, inanimate, cold, inert, like a sullen and tragic mother hiding her face under a winding sheet. His native soil, his very own, without a fireside, without a heart. He cast his eyes upwards and stood amazed. The snow had ceased to fall, and now, as if by a miracle, he saw above his head the clear black sky of the northern winter, decorated with the sumptuous fires of the stars. It was a canopy fit for the resplendent purity of the snows. Razumov received an almost physical impression of endless space and of countless millions. He responded to it with the readiness of a Russian who is born to an inheritance of space and numbers. Under the sumptuous immensity of the sky, the snow covered the endless forests, the frozen rivers, the plains of an immense country, obliterating the landmarks, the accidents of the ground, leveling everything under its uniform whiteness, like a monstrous blank page, awaiting the record of an inconceivable history. You can feel the power of those cadences as those clauses are loaded up on top of one another. It's poetry. There's another passage I'd like to quote, and this one is a remark made by the English narrator upon the materials, and how Razumov kind of agreed to become a spy for the Russian authorities. It's kind of heavy too, but it has this kind of irony at work here. This much said, there is no need to tell anything more of that first interview and of the several others. To the morality of a Western reader, an account of these meetings would wear perhaps the sinister character of old legendary tales where the enemy of mankind is represented holding subtly mendacious dialogues with some tempted soul. It is not my part to protest. Let me but remark that the evil one, with his single passion of satanic pride for the only motive, is yet, on a larger modern view, allowed to be not quite so black as he used to be painted. With what greater latitude, then, should we appraise the exact shade of mere mortal man, with his many passions and his miserable ingenuity in error, always dazzled by the base glitter of mixed motives, everlastingly betrayed by a short-sighted wisdom. It's also magnificent the words of two different characters, but also Conrad shining through both. And you can expect a lot more of that if you read this book. Now, the last part I want to deal with is one really interesting fact or feature of this text is its engagement with Frankenstein, which is one of my favourite novels, actually, as a work of art. And it's set in Geneva, as is Frankenstein. And Heldin, the brother, is called Victor, and so the sister is called Victorova. And Razumov is kind of Frankenstein's monster, Victor Frankenstein's monster, because he is created, in effect, by this imposing by Heldin upon him by suddenly appearing in his rooms and demanding assistance. And also, in common with Frankenstein's monster, Razumov is an orphan. He doesn't know who his parents are, so he's kind of ready to be created. And it becomes, in effect, what kind of monster will he be? One of his own creation, or the creation of others? And there's another part, there's another character who also resembles Frankenstein's monster, and that is Peter Ivanovich. There is just a 2 or 3 page section, beautifully written and imagined, where Peter Ivanovich is escaping bondage in Russia and making his escape east, and it recapitulates Frankenstein's monster's journey after he leaves the laboratory, where he's living on acorns and berries. But whereas the monster saves the life of a young girl, in Ivanovich, his life is saved by a kind of peasant woman, and that inspires him to develop his cult of womanhood, his cult of femininity. Sounds a little bit like D.H. Lawrence at times. So Geneva is attracting these monsters to it for this conclusion, as these revolutionists mill around trying to work out how to strike and unleash the forces of revolution in Russia. So there's a scene with a large map spread out, and they're all poring over the Balkans. Can they sow, discord and start a fire in the Balkans? So there is this intertextual part, which is up to you how much you want to follow its pattern. But for myself, the sequence of confessions which conclude Under Western Eyes do rework my favorite moment from Frankenstein, which is the monster's confession. It takes place above Chamonix, where he meets Victor, and he makes Victor sit through the narrative of what he's done to Victor's family, the murders and the wrongful execution, that he caused. And what it amounts to is here, and Sartre describes this really well in talking about Genet, who I will come on to in a second. But this scene for me, it's sadism. It's sadism marks it out, because this confession is also, in a way, another crime. It's a confession of crime, but it's a fresh crime, and it's undertaken deliberately to torture Victor and to make Victor take his measure of responsibility for the evil, the evil of creation, the monster itself. And so Sartre describes Genet in these terms. It's excellent when he refers to Genet's text. The poem of the evil action is itself an evil action. So yes, but instead of the Frankenstein pattern, in Under Western Eyes you have a confession where it's to an innocent party, to the sister of Victor Heldin, rather than to a guilty party. Really interesting take on this. And the reason I'm mentioning Genet is because for me, Under Western Eyes, it's not as successful as Frankenstein in kind of working out these forces, how they really operate. Genet's book is a little like the scene between the monster and Victor, but an entire book. And that is the relationship between author and reader of this book. You are being made complicit in the crime which is this dangerous book, and the author is demanding that you take action against him, that you actually imprison him as a criminal. He's inviting this. He's taunting you with his text. And so, of these three works of art, and I don't usually plan to do this, but if we had to engage with them, and you know, people do these reviews, don't they, with their stars, 5 stars or 3.5, whatever. I will suggest to you that the bottom layer under Western Eyes, and a layer above, Frankenstein, and for myself, and I will explain in a later video about this excellent novel, this amazing book, Jenny, Our Lady of the Flowers, placed above both of those texts. And I think that's all I've got to say for this video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Tried not to make it too long, and I treated Under Western Eyes kind of by itself because I didn't feel I had another text that I could bring it fruitfully into comparison with, and with its intertextual aspects I didn't need that. I could just use Frankenstein. So until the next time, I will repeat my mantra: be safe, be strong, and I shall see you anon. Nanu nanu.